You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place.
This episode was recorded live in front of a huge crowd of amazing people at Arcana in Durham, North Carolina in September of this year, 2023. I realize this is a bit ahead of schedule for our usual Spooky Season Kickoff, but some alumni of one of the institutions we discuss in this episode heard we talked about it at Arcana, and thus we got multiple requests that they not be made to wait a year, and we were happy to accommodate them. We're cooking up some really fun episodes for 2024, including trying out adding some multimedia components to live episodes, so we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, we wish you a safe, joyous, and maybe a little bit spooky holiday season this year, and thanks for listening. Raise your hand if you can hear me. I want to see how far back. Yes, excellent.
You have omnipresence.
I do. God, I've waited my entire life.
Some might say you're ubiquitous.
Some might, in fact, say that I'm ubiquitous. Give me just a second.
You mind if I just start?
No, go for it.
All right, hello and welcome. Is this recording?
Yes.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Arcane Carolinas Spooky Spectacular 2023 at Arcana Durham. Thank you for being here. I am your co-host, Charlie Mushaw.
I am your other co-host, and it is actually increasingly weird to say it in front of strangers, multi-award-winning novelist Michael G. Williams. I promise I'm not, super on myself about that, though.
You say it every time.
I do. That's because my publisher listens.
Who has seen us live before? Okay, couple of hands. Cool. So here's the deal. If you listen to who listens to the show regularly and knows what the show's about. Okay, cool.
Excellent.
So I don't have to explain too much. Bottom line is, live, it's a little different. There may be some swear words. We edit those out of the show because we know that kids listen and we want to present a safe for work experience. So if we offend you tonight with our language here and there, sorry, but don't worry, it'll get cut out of the final edit. And then at the end, we like to generally have a discussion and open it up and talk about different topics and hear from you. But for now, we're going to do our usual live routine, which is a bit of a grab bag where one of us tells a story, then the other one tells a story, then it goes back to the other one. And we're going to start with Michael, who has told me that this one is grim.
Oh, it is. It's so delightfully awful. It really makes the horror writer in me happy. We're going to talk about the woman in white of Watts Hospital. And this is a story that's local to Durham. Watts Hospital was established in 1895 in Durham by a local industrialist.
I should not read your notes, right?
You should not read my notes.
I was just like a moth to a light. I was just like, ooh, a screen.
What's
on that?
I'm gonna attempt not to read my notes, but we'll see.
Cool. There's different colors on there.
There are.
It's really well put together.
Makes it easier for me to find my place.
It's better than mine. I have paper.
I have anxiety and ADHD.
Peanut butter and jelly.
I make lists about making lists.
I will not look there.
I actually made a list after I had gotten everything together for the car tonight because I was so convinced I had forgotten something. I was like, well, let me just make a list of everything I've got and see if that looks complete. And then I was like, okay, I'm good.
I did forget something and called you like, can you please bring the gear?
Yeah.
So it worked out.
George Washington Watts was a local industrialist and philanthropist. That one I got out easy.
It's the nicer one of the two.
It is. He, in 1895, spent $50,000 to found Watts Hospital in Durham. The original building was, if you're familiar with Durham, was up on the corner of Main and what's now Buchanan, where there's a residence inn that's right next to Duke's East Campus. But at the time, it was a hospital.
Okay.
It was a 22-bed hospital, and it is worth pointing out that it was a segregated hospital due to the times. Watts had been a co-founder of the American Tobacco Company. The other co-founders of American Tobacco Company, as in American Tobacco Campus across the street.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were the Dukes, as in Duke University.
As in the mayonnaise.
Yes. I don't know. Are they the mayonnaise?
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, there we go. Different Dukes.
Many successful Dukes.
There are plenty of successful Dukes. That's probably why they call them that. Anyway, The Dukes spent money to found Lincoln Hospital roughly around the same time at the urging of local black community and business leaders. And Lincoln Hospital was the hospital founded at the same time for the black population of Durham. Founded at the same time as Watts Hospital was the Watts School of Nursing.
Okay.
And so the hospital was actually a teaching hospital and was part of a nursing school. Like a nursing school was part of the hospital. And actually the same was true of the Lincoln Hospital. The Lincoln School of Nursing still exists. It's still part of North Carolina Central University. But neither of those hospitals still exists.
Okay.
The original structure had 22 beds. They had rapidly outgrown it. And by 1906, they realized they needed to build a new structure.
Okay.
So in 1909, Watts Hospital was replaced by a 25-acre campus with these really large, beautiful buildings that were built in the Spanish mission style.
Where there's now a residence inn.
No. They moved to a different location in Durham.
Okay.
On a 25-acre plot that was empty at the time and built this really beautiful school.
I was going to say, is it a La Quinta now?
Now it's, oh God, whatever. You and Glenn can go laugh at that joke.
No, you know what I'm saying? They have the Spanish-style roofing on those hotels. Have you not seen them?
I don't spend a lot of time looking at hotels. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm sad.
That's me. I'm too busy making lists to notice the exteriors of hotels. The nursing school moved with it to the new facility and operated for many decades as a healthcare facility and school. So now for the ghost story part.
Yes.
Accounts of this vary, and I only found it in a couple of places. But one of those places was Ghost of the Triangle, from which we drew for last year's Arcana.
Yeah.
I was really pleased to find this story in it. And this is the most specific version of it. There was a security guard, maybe named David Cameron, and maybe this was in 1995.
That seems very recent for maybes, but go on.
I'll get there. He was working the night shift at the school part of the campus and was sitting in his car eating his dinner in the middle of the night because there was a driving rainstorm, just like pouring rain in Durham that night. And he looked up and noticed two bright objects crossing the grounds. And at first he thought maybe they were like small animals or something. And he actually, in one version, says, I thought maybe they were rabbits. But he realized abruptly that they were not animals, they were shoes. And
like just shoes.
And out of this rainstorm emerges the figure of a woman.
Okay.
In a long, knee-length white dress and bright white shoes.
Wearing Skechers Light Up Soul sneakers.
Yes. She had the kind where the like wheels pop out of the bottom.
And the lights. She's got the wheels and the lights.
She's got everything.
Ah.
She was like the coolest kid in third grade nursing school. And she also had a sweater wrapped around herself against the rain. The hospital was just a couple of blocks from Duke campus. The security guard thinks, well, this must be somebody from Duke who's like trying to get home after they've been out partying, and they're cutting across the grounds to get to wherever their house is in what's now just like residential North Durham. He thinks, I'm going to go make sure that she's okay.
Reasonable.
So he drives his car across the parking lot and around to where she is and pulls up next to her as she's walking across the parking lot, cracks his window, and says, Miss, are you okay? And he said later that she turned towards him, but incredibly slowly, just as though she were working to make it awkward, and said to him in a voice that he described as not of this world, no, I'm going home. And then she took off running.
Blinky souls into the night.
Yes, Blinky. Yes. So he, Pac-Man, he said, well, this is weird. When she
I'm
takes
uncomfortable
off
now, and this isn't my problem. Rolled his window back up and finished his dinner, and that was the end of the story.
But when she took off running, she ran around the corner of the gymnasium. Remember, this was also a school.
Right.
And so she runs around the corner of the gymnasium, and he realizes that is not the direction somebody would go if they're cutting across campus in the direction that she was originally walking. So he's worried now that something is up.
Sure.
So
you think?
Yeah. Even in the driving rain, he drives his car over to that side of the gymnasium. He jumps out. He runs around the corner that she just ran around, and there is expansive lawn and no woman. So he thinks, well, did she go into the gym? It's the middle of the night, but maybe she did. He goes and checks the door, and the door is locked.
He, being the security guard, has all the keys, so he unlocks the door just in case she's forced her way in some other way, and finds the gym totally empty. And when he checks the floor around all the doors into the gym for mud or water or anything like that, then there's nothing there. 30 seconds before, this woman had been standing next to his car, drenched from the rain, with her hair plastered to her forehead in a complete torrent. And now she's just gone. And then, upon reflection, he remembered a story he had heard that in the 60s, a nursing student had disappeared and later been found murdered. And he thought, well, maybe that's her trying to get back to school. And that's the version that you'll find copied around. But after that, I thought, well, I want to read more about this, because if somebody got murdered at a nursing school in Durham, I could probably find a newspaper story.
Yeah,
about
there's going to be a clipping.
Also, it turns out that Watts Hospital still exists. It's just not Watts Hospital anymore. It's North Carolina School of Science and Math.
Oh, yeah, I know where that is. Yeah. Okay.
In 1976, Watts Hospital and Lincoln Hospital were both closed. They were merged into what at the time was Durham County General Hospital. Now it's Duke Regional.
Yep.
They wanted to modernize both facilities. The Watts Hospital campus got turned into North Carolina School of Science and Math, and the Lincoln Hospital facility got turned into the Lincoln Community Health Center, which still exists and still serves the community around North Carolina Central.
Cool.
That guard was a guard at the high school. But the missing student part of it was a little vague for my taste. Either there's never been a missing student, or there is going to be one in a newspaper somewhere, or there have been so many people reported missing that it's pointless to try to research, But I figured I'd dig into it. And it turns out there is one case of a missing nursing student from when it was Watts Hospital. I'm not going to go into great detail about it, because the details of this story go beyond the boundary of what we normally would be willing to discuss.
It's like a true crime thing?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's the most horrible.
So all we need to confirm is that somebody died.
Well, and a little more than that. In 1971, a 20-year-old nursing student named Patricia Mann and her boyfriend, Jesse McBride, attended the Valentine's Day dance at the Watts Hospital Nursing School. They left the dance to go park in a lover's lane, which was, at the time, a series of cul-de-sacs that had no houses on them, because it was in a new development that was being put up. And it was way out at the time on the edge of town.
Okay.
At that location, they were abducted, taken elsewhere, and really brutally murdered. And when I say brutally murdered, I do not recommend reading up on it if you value your sanity.
And what year was this?
1971.
Okay.
But in 1971, investigators identified internally a prime suspect that they never released the identity of. But they said at the time to themselves that he was probably a specific doctor at Watts Hospital. And the case is reopened periodically when the tech improves. As recently as 2018, they were running DNA tests on some of the evidence.
Really?
Because they think it's possible that the technology will get good enough that they'll be able to demonstrate whether it was or was not this person. Two Durhamites did a podcast in 2018 about the case.
Okay.
And independently of the police who were still surviving, came to the same conclusion, then interviewed the investigators that were still alive and realized they all agreed. So they published that person's identity and revealed that he was a doctor who at the time was still practicing in Durham. I'm not saying who he is, in part because I don't remember his name now, and in part because I'm not the cops and I don't know if he did anything.
Right. We're not a true crime podcast.
Yeah. But the case is technically still unsolved.
Interesting.
And nobody's ever been arrested. But relevant to the ghost story, there really was a student who went missing. She was wearing a white dress the night of the dance.
This is horrible. This isn't
dance-
funny anymore.
I
can't crack jokes on
We'll
this
get there, though.
Okay.
The dance, trust me, the dance was in the gymnasium,
Ooh.
and it was raining the night she was murdered.
Get out.
Yeah. So for me, the story holds up.
That is very plausible.
But there's more. One of my best friends, somebody that you have heard me talk about many times, my friend Brian, he went to North Carolina School of Science and Math in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so I texted him and said, are there any ghost stories that you ever heard when you were a student there? I didn't bait the trap at all.
Yep.
I just asked that question. And his answer was, oh, yeah, there was this time that everybody heard a screaming voice falling from the top floor of a dorm, and everybody ran out there, and there was no body on the ground, and nobody was ever reported missing. And then the security guards were all like, yeah, that happens sometimes. And there was a dorm that everybody was pretty sure was the morgue when it was a hospital, because the bedrooms in the basement all had cement floors with drains in the center. And everybody in that dorm would hear creepy sounds at night. And then Brian said, and there's that woman in white seen around campus at night, especially by the security guards. He knew multiple security guards who saw the woman in white multiple times, and students also saw the woman in white repeatedly. And the story that Brian said without any prompting on my part was, well, I always heard that a doctor murdered a nursing student in the 60s.
Wow.
And this is what he said after that. I've always wondered if she's trying to find that doctor and confront him, because the security guards all wore white dress shirts and black slacks, which is what doctors wore in 1971. And she always left us alone, but she always messes with the security guards.
Freaky.
And
I gotta go get a change of clothes, and we gotta get in the car.
And for one more odd coincidence, that Lover's Lane where she went and from which she and her boyfriend were abducted.
Tell me it's your neighborhood.
No.
Ah.
It was in a neighborhood called Crowsdale.
Okay.
Crowsdale still exists. It's a big country club that's out on the corner of town where like 147 and 15501 and 85 all mangle each other for a couple of miles. And the current home of the Watts College of Nursing, which is part of the Duke University Health System, is on Crowsdale Drive. So it is conceivable that the school she attended is now in the place from which she was taken.
This is a really good one.
And that's the story of the woman in white of Watts Hospital.
Yeah, you got to edit out the thing at the beginning. I thought we were just going to make fun of the hospital, and then it got real sad.
Yeah, well, people getting murdered, it's not like the best thing in the world, but ghosts generally don't happen from happy stuff.
Right.
So at least some ghosts probably are happy. I don't know.
Casper. I don't even know if he's happy. He's just friendly.
He is friendly. That's true. He might have just been like really relieved that he didn't have to go to work anymore.
So we did a bracket of the bizarre earlier in the year.
Yeah.
We should do one with just like college story ghosts, because like
God, every college has
that would be really fun.
Yeah. We nearly did an episode about a school in South Carolina where we had 14 two-sentence long ghost stories. And it was like, how many people have died here? I would have questions if my child wanted to go to this school now.
So is it my turn now?
It is your turn.
All right, who wants to talk about bones?
There are bones in mine too. I just didn't talk about it.
Okay. So this is going to be sort of a meandering one that goes into a little bit about like, how do stories get so twisted? Like yours was a very good example of cut and dry. The oral tradition went in pretty much a straight line.
Yeah.
Some small deviations, but it pretty much went in a straight line. This is going to start about one thing and then turn into another thing.
Okay.
About how oral traditions and stories of high strangeness get, to use your term, all mangled. So that brings me to giant bones.
Oh, I love giant stories.
You do?
Yeah.
That was going to be, how do you feel about giant high strangeness?
Oh, I'm into it. Yeah.
You're into it? Okay. I like it. I don't know that I'm a true believer, but I like it. I like the idea. I mean, we know that megafauna has existed, right?
Sure. I've played enough D&D in my life that I'm like, whatever.
I've seen Yao Ming. He's a very tall man.
He's a very tall man, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody like that would be considered
Sure.
a giant in ancient times.
Imagine what it looks like standing around in the village where the mountain came from or whatever,
Right.
The place in Iceland where he and every other 8-foot tall person comes from.
The 8-foot tall person factory.
Yes.
Just roll off a line. All right.
Really tall doors.
You know, we've gone into this before. Something my father explained to me once about the theory of evolution, of macroevolution versus microevolution, and how different species change over time. I was like, well, how does that work? And he put it so simply, and it worked, and it stuck. And he was like, hey, do you remember that old fort you went on a field trip to? And I was like, yeah. He's like, you know how the door frames were shorter than a normal house? I was like, yeah. He's like, yeah, because people were shorter back then. I was like, oh, because through nutrition and all that, like, people now get bigger. And I'm like, oh. So anyway, now let's picture an 8-foot tall person next to somebody 100 years ago that would have been shorter than people are now.
Yeah.
That's an incredibly reductive and simple way of putting it. And I guess it would be 150 years ago now with the Yeah. What is time?
I grew up in the mountains, so my version of that is beds at the Biltmore House.
Okay. But the same
Yeah.
thing. We were like,
Same
why is
thing.
that smaller?
Yeah.
So anyway, during the later half of the 1800s, giant humans were a hot topic of discussion.
Oh, yeah.
Some headlines from the New York Times. Reported discovery of huge skeleton, December 25th, 1868. That's a real Christmas tale to warm your heart.
I mean, you got to do something when you're sitting around.
This pretty callously named one. More big Indians found in Virginia.
Oh,
September 8th, 1871.
oh,
That was a headline.
wow.
The early American giant, February 8th, 1876.
Okay.
So we were just going with all kinds of theories,
Yeah.
right? I noticed an uptick in giant-oriented high strangeness currently on the web. I feel like you can find a lot of people talking about it, and I think that feeds into what we've discussed of these topics have a cycle.
Oh, yeah.
Things come and go and get in vogue and then fall out. And even in the late 1800s, we saw that with skyships.
Yeah, exactly. I was literally going to say the airships of the 19th
Were
century.
airships, yeah. So it was like airships were all the rage. But then it became giant indigenous Americans became the next thing that people would talk about. And it was just like a cycle, and people would repeat these stories. So the gist of this story, because I need to focus on the Carolinas, because it is Arcane Carolinas, railroad workers employed by the Petersburg Railroad Company, which was founded as a joint venture between North Carolina and Virginia in 1830. The railroad ran from Petersburg, Virginia to Weldon, North Carolina.
Okay.
So the workers were digging along the Roanoke River between Weldon and Gettysburg, North Carolina, when they accidentally unearthed a burial mound. And that burial mound reportedly contained bones that appeared to be that of giant humans.
When they say giant, how giant are we talking?
We're going to get there.
Okay. I'll let you tell your story.
Interrupting is my bit, Michael. The bones were packaged up and sent north to the railroad HQ in Petersburg.
Okay. Because they're archaeologists.
Right. They just threw, so what do we do with this? I don't know. Send them to the boss.
Yeah.
So that's what they did. But not before reporting it to the local newspaper.
Okay.
There's no photos. The story rapidly became syndicated with changes in every reprinting.
Oh, I'm sure.
But it
Every
was,
town had to have giant bones then.
right. But it was originally reported on September 6th and titled Mammoth Remains. I'm just going to read it. This is from the Richmond, Virginia Daily State Journal, September 6th, 1871. Mammoth Remains. It kind of sounds like a metal band.
It does. I'd listen.
Yeah, but not the kind with the logo that just looks like tree roots. Like
No.
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 All right.
This would be blood dripping.
Yes. This is the newspaper. We copy the following wonderful story from the Petersburg Index of this morning. So same day, it's already being copied. And but for the reliable source from which it emanates and the character of its informers, we should be disposed to doubt its truthfulness.
Uh-huh.
Yep. So they're saying this is good stuff, guys.
Suffice to say, I am disposed to doubt its truthfulness.
Okay. The following information is given us by gentlemen of the highest character and credit who have seen with their own eyes, touched and tested with their own hands the wonderful objects of which they make report. The workmen engaged in opening a way for the projected railroad between Weldon and Gettysburg struck Monday about 1 mile from the former place in a bank beside the river a catacomb of skeletons, supposed to be those of Indians of a remote age and a lost and forgotten race. Getting real mystical with it.
Yeah,
Right?
wow.
Real dated.
Fire up the smoke machine.
Right. The bodies exhumed were of a strange and remarkable formation. The skulls were nearly an inch in thickness, and the teeth filed sharp, as are those of cannibals. The enamel perfectly preserved.
Oh, they're making a lot of leaps here.
Yep. The bones were of wonderful length and strength. The femur being as long as the leg of an ordinary man. The stature of the body being probably as great as 8 or 9 feet. So to answer your question,
Oh, that's pretty tall.
we're up in like Yao Ming territory.
Yeah.
Near their heads were sharp stone arrows, stone mortars in which their corn was brayed, and the bowls of pipes apparently of soft, friable soapstone. The teeth of the skeletons are said to be as long as those of horses. One of them has been brought to the city and presented to the officers of the Petersburg Railroad. The bodies were found closely packed together, laid tier on tier as it seemed. There was no discernible ingress or egress to the mound. The mystery is who these giants were, to what race they belong, to what era, and how they came to be buried here. To these inquiries, no answer has yet been made, and meantime, the ruthless spade continues to cleave the body and skull asunder.
Wow.
That's
They
a
just,
really-
went back to digging.
Right. So I do appreciate that the newspaper's like, yeah, we probably shouldn't be doing it that way.
That's pretty forward thinking for their time.
Throwing up in mingled masses the boner of the heroic tribe. This is all quotes, people. This isn't me. This is the newspaper. We hope some effort will be made to preserve authentic and accurate accounts of these discoveries and to throw some light, if possible, on the lost tribe, whose bones are thus rudely disturbed from their sleep in the Earth's bosom.
Wow.
It ends on like a reasonable, more modern, like, yeah, we probably shouldn't have dug that up.
Yeah, probably shouldn't.
Yeah, it starts kind of like, high adventure and strange places, like film reel stuff, and then ends with like, maybe we shouldn't do this. The thing is, this got repeated over a decade and presented as new.
It had just happened.
Like it had just happened, and the location kept changing. At one point, it was in Pittsburgh, not Petersburg. Well, and it wasn't even in Petersburg.
Yeah.
Right? So they were like, oh, it's the Pittsburgh Railroad, not the Petersburg Railroad. And it all started just 2 days later when that New York Times article with the ridiculous headline that I read earlier.
Yeah.
That's when it started to change. They took the story out of North Carolina and put it in Virginia.
Wow.
So that article in full, which I will not read to you because it's mostly the same except for not to be behind Canada, which is that's the random opening line.
Weirdly specific.
Right. So there's the headline, and then the very first line is not to be behind Canada. Virginia claims its own possession of a cave full of dead people. Like it goes into.
You can find caves full of dead people everywhere.
And it goes on, and it basically repeats all the same stuff. It cuts out that we should be more reasonable with the remains part and keeps the sensational parts. Yeah, New York Times, September 8th, 1871. Already started changing the pretty cool story, honestly. I think it's cool. I like the idea of giant humanoids, but like I said, I'm not convinced. So this is important because it illustrates very clearly how we've talked about in other episodes, how things cycle in and out of public consciousness, how stories change with who's telling it, and sometimes it's innocent, like it's a game of telephone, like you tell me something and I misremember it and I tell Jesse something different. But what if, Michael, I've had enough? And what if this is just another plot by the Commonwealth of Virginia to sully the good name of North Carolina by stealing our giants' bones?
That's actually extremely believable.
It is. Now, before I go into my tirade about Virginia, who have an excellent flag, but that's the best thing they got going for them. The reality is that there is a Weldon, Virginia. There is a Garysville, Virginia. There is a Petersburg, North Carolina. So you can kind of see how this could possibly innocently get mixed.
Okay.
But I want to go back to the rivalry that predates the existence of the colonies.
Okay.
There was an expedition, a joint expedition between North Carolina and Virginia that was not quite as friendly as the one that put together that railroad. It was when they were making the line between the states.
Yeah.
The delegation included William Byrd II. He was a surveyor, an author, a statesman, and snooty.
He had been named the second. Of course he was.
He was one of the Virginians in charge of physically drawing the borderline between Virginia and North Carolina. It's a big project. And then he wrote a book about it. In it, he found it appropriate to say this about his cousins to the south.
Oh.
The only business here is raising of hogs, which is managed with the least trouble and affords the diet they are most fond of. The truth of it is, the inhabitants of North Carolina devour so much swine's flesh that it fills them full of gross humors. Thus, whenever a severe cold happens, constitutions are vitiated and it has the symptoms of syphilis.
Oh. Did he just say barbecue gives people syphilis?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Keep going.
He said if you eat barbecue, you're syphilitic. Is it syphilitic?
If any railroad companies are looking for a grave to run a railroad through, I've got one to nominate now.
This calamity is so common and familiar here, it ceases to be a scandal.
Oh, jeez. It's just like, welcome to North Carolina. Here's your pork syphilis.
So this is the way the states started their relationship. Now, by contrast, Byrd himself proclaims in his book to be the model aristocrat and virtuous colonial person of influence. However, after he died, his diaries came out, and it detailed all of his extramarital affairs.
Oh, wow.
Mr.
Got one in common with Aaron
Bird.
Burr right there.
Now, North Carolina struck back.
How so?
Much, much later. In June of 1897,
Okay.
a delegation of North Carolinians crashed a political rally in Richmond. They arrived late. They marched in, refused to sit, and started singing the Old North State. And completely shut down proceedings,
All right.
forcing the head of the rally to say a bunch of nice things about North Carolina. Like that happened.
I feel like that's just political theater. When I say political theater, I mean that's like street theater, and I love it.
Yeah. He did close with this quote, and now let North Carolina take her seat and be quiet. But I feel like we won that one.
I need to remember to use that to start a meeting sometime.
But I digress. Giant bones, allegedly found in North Carolina. We're taking that story back. Those are our giant bones.
Okay.
And you can actually visit the site.
Really?
Yeah. The rail line still goes over the Roanoke River right there, right in between those two little towns that sit across from each other.
Yeah.
And there is a state or town maintained trailhead right there. So you can go down and walk around and you can experience the site of where giant bones were allegedly recovered.
That's wild. So it's a real place and everything.
Yeah.
I was fully expecting for the outcome of this to be none of these places even exist.
They exist so much that each state has their own towns with the same name.
Okay.
But when you pull up a map and you look at the geography, there's no river
Yeah.
crossing between the other ones.
Yeah.
There's not a rail line there. If you look up where the actual rail line ran, that's where it was. Kind of related. Mm-hmm. Okay. Giant bones, not giant bones.
Right.
Right. So
So
big
bones that are large
bones that are large.
instead of bones of giants.
Yes.
Okay.
There is a boneyard in Raleigh, and it's full of whale bones.
Really?
Yeah, legit.
Like actual whale bones
Actual whale bones.
were transported to this place.
Yep, and they are regularly. They have a process there. The North Carolina Museum of Natural Science does controlled decompositions on
Yeah.
whale carcasses to preserve the bones.
Wow.
So there's
that's so cool.
field in Raleigh, and they just cover them in manure, and the beetles in the manure do their thing on the bones, and that's how you get whale skeletons in a museum. So there are giant bones in Raleigh,
Wow. Okay.
but not giant bones.
Right.
Right.
They're very large bones.
Very large bones.
Yes.
And again, how things get twisted. I actually had someone at a convention come up to me, be like, "Are you ever going to do the story about how they found whale bones in a creek in Wake County?" And I was just like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's just the boneyard." Anyway, throw that in there. That's my very silly palate cleanser story.
Okay, yeah,
about
thank
giant
you.
bones and the ongoing centuries-long rivalry with the state of Virginia.
It's not about horrible murders. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's about barbecue and
Yeah.
bones
And syphilis.
and syphilis.
I feel like pork syphilis is probably the name of a disease.
But it is illustrative is if you dig enough into folklore and the weird stories, and that's really what we try to do, is you can find like where it kind of started, or at least
Yeah.
an inkling of it.
Totally.
So I don't have pictures of the bones, but
That's really cool, though.
yeah.
I love that kind of thing. I don't know. That kind of like the beginning of the era where people were like, we're going to understand everything about the world. And now there's airships and giants, and et cetera.
meme? Oh.
And they're also like, dinosaurs aren't real. You know? So,
Doctor, what's wrong with me? Oh, you've got ghosts in your blood. Do some cocaine about it.
right. That era is both enticing and horrifying. And
Right.
That's basically my favorite mix, you know?
Real Leave Extraordinary Gentleman vibe.
Yes.
Any idea where the bones went?
No, that's the thing that's stupid about this story, is they shift.
It's not the giant.
There's no
bones.
follow through. There's zero follow through. They just repeated I say they. Newspapers and books just kept repeating the same thing. Nobody bothered to contact the Petersburg Railroad Company, which continued to exist for some time.
Yeah.
And be like, well, what'd y'all do with them bones? Don't you think the Smithsonian would be interested in that?
The odds are very high that rail company still exists as, you know, at 7 generations removed, having been purchased by, you know, somebody that still exists.
Sure,
Are you ready for one more fun little story?
I am.
All right.
And then I want a Diet Coke.
Okay, let's talk about the death and resurrection of Phoebe Ward, witch.
I like a good witch tale.
There you go. This is a fun witch story. Last year we had a really grim witch story about the dude who'd been cursed and then the witch died and then he was convinced he'd never get the curse lifted and etc. This is a really fun witch story, actually. This was published in the Journal of American Folklore in 1909.
Okay.
And it was
That's good witch era.
Isn't it? It's good witch stuff. It was told by an elderly gentleman who had grown up in the community of Pendleton, North Carolina. Pendleton is in the northeast corner of the state. It is in Northampton County. And he said at the time that this had occurred when he was a young boy. Or it is possible that he told the folklorist that when he was a young boy, he heard this story. And it is difficult to tell from the account given which he means.
It was a different time, you see.
It was, and people used their words in funny ways.
Ways funny, the words of man.
Yes.
Good humors.
So, Pendleton is an unincorporated community of about 600 residents. It does have a post office, however. Good for them. And Northampton County's population is roughly the same today as it was in 1820.
Weird.
There are 17,000 people in that county, and there were 18,200 years ago.
Is this the kind of place where like somebody's born, they're like, all right, somebody's got to go. We got to kick some seats taken.
Granddad's got to wade out into the river.
Yeah.
You know?
The old gods must be satiated.
Now we're speaking my language. Okay. Originally, Northampton County in this region in specific of it was the home of the Maharan people. In their language, they call themselves the Gwawinchaga, which means people of the waters. They were an Iroquoian people. They first encountered English settlers in Virginia in 1650. Eventually, they were driven south into North Carolina, and in the course of a border dispute with the state of Virginia, because
See? Yes.
Because the Synergy Fairy always does this. We constantly will do stuff like this and not tell each other what we're going to talk about, and then show up and we've got stories from the same town or something like that. So, in the middle of a border dispute, they got driven into North Carolina and the line got drawn, and they became a tribe that lived in North Carolina.
Virginia.
The colony, Virginia literally drove them out. The colony granted them a reservation, like way back in the day. And an interesting footnote about the Maharan people, they have fought on the side of the United States in every major conflict, including the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, you name it. In the French and Indian War, before there was a United States, George Washington personally recruited the Maharan people to fight on the side of the English colonies against the French. That's an interesting little tidbit of history about them. They formed a tribal government in 1975. They got state recognition in 1986, and they have an annual powwow every year the first week of October. So it's next week.
Oh, cool.
In their tribal lands, they do drum and dance competitions. They do traditional crafts, traditional foods. It is open to the public, and they enthusiastically welcome people to come and see and be a part of it. I just think that's really neat. It's like way out, though, so I'm not going.
Too close to Virginia. You might get captured. Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I don't actually hate Virginia. I got some speeding tickets there, and I'm just salty. But I don't hate them.
Anyway.
Phoebe Ward.
Witch. She was an elderly woman, and I note that she was white because there's some overlap with some Gullah belief in this story.
Okay.
And I want to emphasize this is not a Gullah story. I don't know.
Interesting.
But I just mentioned that because it's mentioned in the original accounting. She didn't have any job. She was a very elderly woman.
I'd say her job was being a witch.
She had no income, and she had no home. She got by in the community of Pendleton by begging for handouts from door to door.
Okay.
She basically lived wherever she could find enough roof to keep her dry. So she lived in abandoned shacks.
I thought you said this wasn't sad.
But it's really fun. It gets there. And she lived in people's barns. She'd sometimes ask to go live in a structure on their property. And people were really scared to tell her no because she was reputed to have great powers.
I mean, that's one way.
Before I get to her powers, people were afraid of taking her off by giving her nothing. But also, she had a reputation for taking advantage of people's generosity if they were too kind to her. And they'd basically she'd try to set up shop in their house.
Okay.
So people had all these tricks to
We've
keep
all
her
got
away.
that friend.
We've all got that friend. They would put a horseshoe over the door. They'd put a metal sieve over the door and believe that she would have to travel through each hole in the sieve before she could enter. Stuff like that. A special thing they did was they would stick pens upright through the cushion of a chair and then try to invite her to sit on it. That's
horrible.
Sit on the seat and run away. Stuff like that. She also, supposedly, as her powers, had an ointment that she could prepare that would allow her to slip her skin off and go run around without her skin.
I hate this.
And that's an overlap with boo hags,
with the boo
which
hags.
is why that distinction. But she was not a boo hag story.
Interesting. She
Also,
had a human suit.
She had a human suit, but who doesn't? She would ride people in their sleep. She would ride animals in their sleep, the way the witches were said to do. And if somebody walked outside in Pendleton in the morning and their horse had tangles in its mane, they believed that she had tied knots in the mane and ridden their horse using those tangles as stirrups. All like traditional witch stuff.
Yeah. Your basic witch stuff.
Yeah. She also repeatedly could make horses jump great distances. And so part of the story about her was that one time she made the mistake of complimenting a horse as it leapt a river on her command, and witches were forbidden from speaking while they were in the air, and so the horse and she fell into the river. But all these people believed.
We got wet.
Yeah.
Okay.
All these people in Pendleton believed the story, and so Phoebe just went about her life being feared by the community. So one night, a group of gentlemen had been drinking brandy. And it's important to note that brandy was the most widely crafted and consumed liquor in the United States up until the very end of the 19th century, because there were a lot of agrarian communities, a lot of people produced fruit. It was easy to make brandy. But this stuff was strong. This was not, sip it from a snifter in a whodunit movie kind of brandy. This is not what the professor has, back in their office. This was for getting wrecked,
Purpose built.
Yes. So this group decided to pay a visit to Phoebe to see how she was doing. And they...
You know what we should do? We should go talk to the witch. We should go see what the witch is up to.
That was pretty much their day.
We should make our horses jump real high.
So they go pay her a visit. They go pay her a visit in whatever shack or lean-to or whatever it is she was staying in, and they find her seemingly deceased. And they decide the noble thing to do would be to shroud her for burial and lay her out and then hold a wake. Because they've got all this brandy, and they know that Phoebe would have wanted people to party in her absence. And so they decide to just keep partying with her body wrapped in its shroud over there. And they just set up their barrel and kept drinking. And they get to drinking more and more brandy, and they get louder and louder, and the party gets more and more raucous. And then eventually they are all shocked into stunned silence when a creaky little wavery voice from under the shroud says, and this is a direct quote, "Give me a little, it's mighty cold out here." And the crowd scatters immediately in a panic, except for a guy named Uncle Benny, who was too drunk to run.
We've all got that, Uncle.
Everybody else in the crowd is just, too bad for Uncle Benny, we're out of here. And they go. They all come back the next morning thinking they're going to find Uncle Benny having been totally defeated by this witch. And what they find is Uncle Benny and Phoebe sitting by the fire, sipping their brandy, talking and laughing, and having a grand old time because she was just asleep. And it made me think of the story from the Terry Pratchett novels of Granny Weatherwax, who is an old witch and has a habit of borrowing animals by getting in their heads and going and running around. And she eventually learns that she needs to have a sign on her body when she does so that says, "I ain't dead." And I kind of feel like that's the situation that Phoebe Ward was in that moment. It turned out she was fine. She was perfectly happy to sit down at the fire with Uncle Benny and spend the night drinking with him. And the story concludes by the old man saying, Phoebe went on to live, despite being very elderly, for many more years. And they were very happy years because she just kept doing whatever she wanted. She just walked around demanding that people give her stuff and living in their shacks. And that is the death and resurrection of Phoebe Ward.
That is a fun one.
It is a fun one.
I like it. It's pleasant.
I like the idea that this party full of really drunk dudes is just hammered.
We should go check on the witch.
Convinced she's dead, try to do something nice for her anyway, and then are scared out of their minds. I feel like Phoebe gets the best of everything in that story.
It's a good one.
So there you go.
Well, thank you.
Party loud enough to wake the bed.
Exactly. Yeah. Who's not been there?
Oh, that's it for us, right?
That is.
So that's it for the stories. Thank you for listening to the stories.
Are there questions? Yes.
What's that on your table there in the corner? That black thing?
This is You Are Not a Plant. I don't know that man. This is the brand new Arcane Carolinas book, written by me with a foreword by him.
Yeah.
Illustrated by me. It's volume 1 of a series we're going to keep going where we collect stories in the format that we usually do on the show, where we'll share a little bit about where the story comes from, then what the legend is, and then dig into the real history of it. So some of them are very short when it's like, yep, that happened, and here's why.
Yeah.
And then some of them go a little meandering, and we find out some interesting tidbits. But yeah, so this book is here. Got lots of free stuff there. Please take some free stuff.
Yeah, tons of stickers and keychains and all kinds of stuff.
The books are not free.
The books are on Amazon.
The books are on Amazon. The books are on Amazon, or I've got a couple here. Those are $10. Thank you for asking.
Anybody else? Yes.
Question. As far as like how you start your research, like you hear a story, what do you do next?
Generally, it'll be like, it depends on the story, right? So if it's this person, if we have a name, well, I can only speak for myself because we do them separate.
Yeah, we have very different approaches, I think.
If I have a name, I immediately hit up like Ancestry and census records and stuff like that, and I try to find the person. Mm-hmm. And I try to find the person in a reasonable span of dates, because like we just talked about in the second one tonight, dates are squishy sometimes. And if I can identify a person, then I'll think, okay, there might be something to this, as opposed to Captain Eli Blood on the Korra Tree episode, where I'm like, there is no Eli Blood. That is the most Dungeons and Dragons villain made up, like, monster manual name ever. And so once I determine, okay, there might be something here, then I'll just start trying to come up with really weird queries for Google, and do Google dorking is what it's called, and just start slamming in different combinations of stuff. And when all else fails, I use Bing.
It depends on the story, but I usually find mine in books originally. So then I start by seeing if that book has any reference information or anything like that, or if there are any other books to mention it, or if I can find, if it's any event that might have been newsworthy, I go to newspapers.com, or I go to the State Library of North Carolina. Their website is super powerful for doing research, and they can pull in all kinds of resources. And I do a lot of chatting with the Ask a Librarian feature in various towns, or I'll call the public library in a town and say, have you ever heard of this story? Do you have any resources? So there are a bunch of things where we knew very little, and I just called the public library in that place and asked, and they were like, here are 1 million resources for you. So
every now and again we get lucky and we get a primary source too.
Oh yeah,
that's very rare, but every now and again we'll get lucky and somebody will be like, hey, this happened to my grandfather, and you're just like, really? Tell me more about that, please.
Yeah. Or like with Brian and and I couldn't believe that when I just said, were there any ghost stories about North Carolina School of Science and Math? He was like, oh yeah, here's the ghost story that is literally the one you're not asking me about. We just get lucky sometimes. Also though, it's a lot easier sometimes to find this stuff than you'd think, because so many people have experiences or have heard stories or really enjoy these stories and are a little embarrassed about telling somebody. And the second somebody cracks the door by asking them about it, then they are like, here's all of my information.
How many times do you start looking at stuff and then find out conveniently a story showed up as soon as like a restaurant opened up? It's like, oh no, our building's been totally haunted for 200 years.
Right.
So much. I feel like I wind up with those ones.
You do.
I wind
literally never had that one happen.
I feel like I get stuck on those because I chase every little scrap, and it'll be like, nope, this is from a blog. Nope, that's from a restaurant's menu. Nope, that's from a ghost tour in this town that this person admitted that they made it up in this interview, and then but somebody else was like, I'm going to put that in my book.
Whereas I am a huge nerd, and so I spend a lot of time reading things like the Journal of Folklore from 1909, because why not?
Yes, sir.
Have you had a paranormal experience directly related to one of the stories you're working on? Has the story come to you?
As far as stories that relate that we're reading up on or like looking into, having had an experience about one of those, I think probably the closest thing, and this is actually fairly recent. This happened like a month or so ago, and it's not like huge and dramatic, and I'm not like, oh, I saw a ghost and it talked to me and it shared its favorite recipes for pasta sauce with me,
and now we're best friends.
And we hang out and play Call of Duty.
Yeah.
It's not.
It gets ectoplasm all over my keyboard.
I'm getting like way down the rabbit hole on that stupid joke. But so one of the things that we've talked about, we specifically talked about this in the Purgatory Mountain episode, the Oz effect, where when something strange is about to happen, it's almost like everything gets sucked out of the room, right? So you're in the woods and all of a sudden everything's quiet and you're just like keenly aware of that in that moment. You're like, hey, I can hear the bits of sand under my shoe on the asphalt. So something that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I told you about it. And it took me probably 2 days to talk to my wife about it because it did freak me out that much. So I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I got up just before 5. I was out the door at 5. And I was out in the neighborhood going for a little jog. And I came around the corner and there was, and I don't know what it was. It might have been a bobcat that was up on its front paws. It might have been a kid that was trying door handles to like get through cars because that's been happening in the neighborhood. I don't know. But something was on the rear quarter panel of a car a few driveways ahead of me, and it ducked down really quick as soon as I rounded the corner and saw it, and I was like, oh no. And it freaked me out because it was weird. It was something, it moved really quick. I don't know what it was, but I was like, whatever. It was probably an animal or something. But then I was just like, it is so dead quiet. But also it was 5 o'clock in the morning. But I was just like frozen. So I just started like walking backwards from it. And just like total like Shaggy and Scooby-Doo, like zoinks. And walking backwards, keep my eye on it. And then as I got to my house to go back up into my house, the street light behind me switched off, and I was like, ah! And all the other street lights stayed on, and it was probably a timer. Maybe it overheated because sometimes the bulbs shut off when they overheat. And I can come up with a million reasons to explain this away about why I shouldn't be freaked out, but I was really freaked out. And I think that is a direct correlation to we've described it sometimes as like an extrasensory thing that you can't necessarily explain. Why does that happen to us? Like, why does when we're in a strange situation, why do we feel certain sensations that we can't explain? I don't know. So I don't mean extrasensory in like I can levitate this or, whatever. I can close my eyes in remote view, but like it did feel like a strange sort of Oz effect and extrasensory thing.
I wonder if it's an evolutionary kind of thing where you tune out all the common sounds.
Right.
And traffic or bird song.
And become like hyper focused on like where the perceived threat could be coming. But yeah, to answer your question, that was a weird thing that happened. Cool. Well, yeah, we're going to hang out for a little bit. I'm going to get something to drink.
Yeah.
I'm thirsty.
So if you want to chat or get some stickers or anything.
Oh, yeah. So we got these really cool, like vintage motel style keychains.
We have our ghost lights. Stickers.
Oh, and the new stickers. I like making stickers. And then there's some new ones that are just for this fall, which there's an owl and then another one with a ghost. Check out all the stuff over here. It's all free. Please take it. We brought it to give to you to say thank you for being here and talking to us and engaging. And we really do want Arcane Carolinas to be a community and not just us.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes, behind-the-scenes information, and links to our social media, check out www.arcanecarolinas.com, where you can also buy the Arcane Carolinas book.
And if you like award-winning horror and science fiction, check out my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com or visit my publisher, Falstaff Books, at falstaffbooks.com. And if you have story suggestions, comments, or questions, email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And thanks for listening.
I probably wouldn't have made that joke earlier to known it was that serious, but here we are. Let's keep going.
That's the magic of editing, Charlie.
We run into this with the way things are named sometimes where you're like, that's a little on the nose.
How about you wait for the story to get there?
All right.
It has a narrative flow and everything.
Okay. I'll shut up. See what I did there?
Somebody's been peeking at my Christmas list.
Pause for effect.
I'm definitely not going to put this in the episode. I don't need to ruin anybody's life like that. But in the movie of Arcane Carolinas, that would happen, and it would be really funny.
Is that what actually happens?
It is. Every recording
It's not
session
a
is a
regular
Zoom
episode.
call that's 25 minutes longer than any given episode. And
And it's always fun to do this in front of people and be like, we're real dumb.
we have no idea what we're doing.
We are Muppets.
Adobe Audition makes it sound like we know what we're talking about. With the right plugins, it is possible to make even me sound reasonably intelligent.